Hey, welcome back to our last conversation with Jesus in regards to cultural conversations that Jesus had with some of the ladies throughout the Gospels. The text that we're going to look at today comes from John chapter 4. Many of you might know this text. It's about the lady that's at the well, and Jesus confronts her in regards to her marriages, plural, and the man that she is now living with who's not even her own husband. But hidden within this text, starting down there in chapter 19, is a wonderful statement. In fact, it's the only really good theological conversation Jesus has written down for us in regards to how and where to worship. We notice there in the passage of John 4:19, the woman says, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship." Jesus said to this lady, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither this mountain nor the one in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. Your worship what you do not know, you worship what we know, for the salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship Him. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship Him in spirit and in truth." The woman said to Jesus, "I know that the Messiah is coming, and I know that He is going to be called Christ. When He comes, He will tell us all of these things." And Jesus said to her, "I who speak to you am He." This passage is one passage that has befuddled many theological readers and New Testament scholars for a long time reading this text. And so I would like us to discuss it in regards to the cultural background behind this passage. One of the first things that we need to consider is, one, Jesus is a Jewish rabbi. Therefore, he really shouldn't be speaking with this lady who is a Samaritan believer. Two, where they are located at this point in time is a place that's called Mount Gerizim. Still to this day, in modern-day Israel, you can get on a bus and you can go to Mount Gerizim. It's now in the West Bank area. And Mount Gerizim is where all of the modern-day Samaritans still have a temple, still worship, still sacrifice. And they are there on that very mountain where Jesus has this conversation. So what's at the heart of this conversation between Jesus and this lady that we should really understand? Most of the time, people want to jump to the text where down there it says we should worship Him in spirit and truth. And then the question becomes, well, what does Jesus mean by spirit and what does Jesus mean by truth? Well, let's pause and rewind. Because you notice there in 19 and 20, the lady asks Jesus and says, "Our ancestors tell us to worship at this mountain. Your ancestors tell you to worship at the mountain in Jerusalem, which is Mount Moriah." Here's what we actually know. The Samaritans, like the Jews, have the Torah. The Samaritans, like the Jews, read and speak Hebrew. The difference is that the Samaritans speak what we call Paleo-Hebrew, and their text actually looks quite different than the Hebrew that I teach at OBU. Therefore, whenever we go read the Samaritan Hebrew text in regards to the Ten Commandments, you'll find, well, a different set of 10 commandments. In fact, number 10 in the Samaritan Pentateuch says, "Thou shalt worship Yahweh your God on Mount Gerizim." Yep, that's not the 10th commandment in our Bible, is it? And so whenever she says, "Our ancestors say that we're to worship here on this mountain," she's literally referring to the 10 commandments that the Samaritans have. Now, let's get to this spirit and truth thing in the cultural context. Because notice, Jesus makes the point, a time is coming that you won't worship on either mountain. Well, there's a really interesting irony as to what's happening in the text where we compare both the Jewish worship on Mount Moriah in Jesus' day and the Samaritan worship on Mount Gerizim in Jesus' day as well. One thing we know about both of these places is that, well, the Spirit of the Lord is not at either of them. The last time the temple and the tabernacle was set up there at Mount Gerizim, you'd probably have to go back to the book of Joshua for that. The last time that the Spirit of God and the Ark of the Covenant was there at Mount Moriah in the Temple Mount of Jerusalem was, well, you'd probably have to go back to Ezekiel for that. See, the irony of this text, the biblical background that I love to discuss in this, is that Both the Samaritans at Mount Gerizim and the Jews in Jerusalem were going to a temple and doing fictive worship for a God who wasn't even there. This is part of the great scandal of whenever Jesus dies and that curtain rips from top to bottom and it falls in the temple and suddenly all the priests fall onto their face. Two interesting possible reasons why they do that. One is because they feared the presence of the Lord, but two, they fell on their faces in anguish whenever they realized that they had been worshiping in a temple where there was no Ark of the Covenant or the Spirit of God. So when Jesus says, this is true worship, my dear lady, spirit and truth, we need to now postulate the question for us, where is the Spirit of God and what is truth? I like what one of my friends, Tony Marita, says about this text. Spirit and truth is sort of kind of like having two wings on an airplane. You can't have spirit only, and you can't have truth only. If you have one or the other only, then it will train wreck, or in this case, airplane wreck, into what is called idolatry. And so whenever we come to the text here, we think, and we're pretty certain in the first century, both the Jews and the Samaritans were doing fictive worship. They were emboldening weird emotional states, and it wasn't true. Because the Lord wasn't dwelling on either of those mountains anymore, for in fact, he was dwelling in the Christ who was there, as he announced in verse 26, I am he. So what does this mean for us? He told the lady, it doesn't matter where you worship, if it's Mount Gerizim or the temple. In fact, the future is neither of those mountains. Still to this day, yes, the Samaritans are on Mount Gerizim, but no, the Jews are not on top of Mount Moriah, for the Dome of the Rock is there, and Jews are not permitted to worship on top of the Temple Mount still to this day in 2022. So how and where do we tell people to go worship? Here's what we should take from this text. Number one, we should take from this text that we should worship when the Spirit of the Lord is in our presence. Now, I'm not going to go to that text where it says where two or more are gathered together, there in their presence am I, for that's regarding spiritual discipline in the church. But what we can say is when the people of God are studying the Word of God, the presence of God is definitely there with them. So that can happen in a church like this one. That can happen in a church like the others that we have visited in this video series. That can happen in an underground church like some of the churches I have visited in Asia. We can worship in any location so long as it's the people of God with the Word of God and the presence of God being acknowledged there. Secondly, whenever it says in truth, he's bringing to the table this reality that we should not just seek for the spirit and for the emotional high, but also that we should strive to delve into the depths of who Christ is, who he said that God the Father is, and the history of who he is throughout these texts. But sadly, in this day and age, many people strive to just talk about the emotions. These emotions that they have oftentimes yield idolatry in a special, unique way. So, how should we worship? One, acknowledge that the Spirit of the Lord is with us whenever the people of God are together studying the Word of God. Two, we should strive to really know the depths of the text, the truth. As we grow in our faith with the Lord, might we grow deeper in our doctrines of the faith and our knowledge of these things. And three, might we acknowledge that sometimes what we consider tradition needs to be supplanted by truth of who Jesus is. This is a cultural conversation about worship, worthy of having at any church, anywhere in the world. Thanks for joining us this time. Be blessed.